All right, guys, we're back at it again on Tell Your Story Alaska, where we are going to get to know our state one village at a time. Today, we're going to be doing Chitina and, make sure I pronounce it right, Chuathbaluk. Chitina and Chuathbaluk. These were pretty fun to research. Kind of how I spent, well, part of my day. Had a lot of other things going on today, but this was kind of a fun one. There's a lot of neat things in this one, so let's dive right in. Chitina is located on the west bank of the Copper River at the confluence of the Chitina River, so that kind of makes sense for the name. It's on the western edge of the Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve, which I believe is the largest national park in the country. It's just huge, huge, huge. I think it's the biggest one. I think I talked about that actually the first episode of this show. Anyway, if you are looking at a map, it is located kind of on the southern panhandle, so like where that stretch of land that reaches into Canada kind of along the coast. That we kind of call it the panhandle. It's kind of where that panhandle starts. It's down there by McCarthy, kind of down in that area at the edge of the Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Now, historically, these were Athabascan lands, and this actually was a large native village, and its population was actually pretty robust. That is until incoming people and disease and conflicts, which is around 1900, the population plummeted, sadly. There are some interesting archaeological sites in the area showing some of its antiquity. This one is cool. It's called the Dhaka Denins Village Site, found nearby. It was found in 1971, and it's believed to be the remains of the home of an Atna clan chief who was believed to have lived there in the early 19th century, so about 200 years ago or so. It includes glass trade beads and wooden structures and 5 stone slabs marking a grave, which is consistent. It's a consistent way to mark graves in Atna oral traditions. That's kind of an interesting site. So that puts the site back to the early 1800s. There's another site called O'Brien Creek Burial Grounds. These are ancestral Atna burial sites that have been found, but they are in an area that gets lots of traffic by fishermen and recreationists. So in response to this, the village of Chitina is trying to close that area to protect the site. They say that the grounds are considered sacred. And of that, they say, we never disturb or move graves. This is engi, which is a word that means taboo. This is engi in our culture. We owe it to our ancestors to honor their resting places with utmost respect and protection. So that's a neat little insight into the Atna culture back then. One is just the way they do the burial grounds, and the other is this respect for graves, and they're wanting to protect these sites. All right, Chitina first shows up in the census in 1920, and it recorded 171 people. It reached its lowest point in population in 1960 with just 31 residents, so a huge decline, and we'll talk about why shortly. As of 2020, it records 101 residents, so something close to that number there today. The Atna people knew of some copper deposits nearby, and they directed some, miners and some seekers, people are exploring the area to these copper deposits around the year 1900. This triggered a rush of prospectors and homesteaders to flood the area, and it became the founding of the famous Kennecott Mines near McCarthy, which is pretty close by. And these Kennecott mines come up a lot with Alaska history. They're rather popular and famous. Right now, it's kind of a tourist place. Now, this popular mine is not in Chitina, but it's nearby, and we'll see why in a second. There was a man named Stephen Birch, who was an engineer from New York, who homesteaded this area in 1908. And eventually, Stephen Birch became the president of the Kennecott Mines because of the copper found there. He probably became a pretty wealthy guy. I didn't really look too much into him, but that would be my guess. In 1914, and this is why Chitina is connected to the mine right here. In 1914, The Northwestern Railway was established to serve the mines, and Chitina became a construction camp for the railroad, and eventually a stop on the railroad and a commercial center for the region. And this is what Chitina became. This enabled Chitina to develop into a thriving community, including a general store, meat market, stables, a tinsmith, 5 hotels, rooming houses. Rooming houses? Isn't that like a hotel? I don't know. That's what it says. A pool hall, bars, restaurants, dance halls, and a movie theater. I was like, man, a movie theater in 1914. But I think maybe that's right. They had like silent movies back then. I kind of wonder about that. That's interesting. A movie theater. A school was built in 1920 for the local native population, which caused the abandonment of the surrounding villages, so families can live by the school and for the economic opportunity. So this might have been the source of the abandonment of other villages. Kind of interesting. I don't know. I'm still stuck on this movie theater thing in 1914. Is that a thing? 1914. I don't know. You can look it up. I'll look it up later. I need to keep going, but that's movie theater in 1914. Okay. When the mines closed in 1938, the town quickly became a ghost town with only some native people and a few non-native staying in the area. A man named Otto Adrian Nelson, who was a surveying engineer for the Kennecott Mines, purchased the town. And then in 1947, his son constructed a hydroelectric system on the river, which supplied electricity to the village. As kind of an engineer, I come from an engineering family. That's just cool. I mean, I want to see how that thing works. But apparently he also supplied hot and cold running water to the town. I love that. I love like innovation stuff. Okay, man, that does remind. I used to always watch Modern Marvels. That was like it's like one of my favorite shows. Like how they build things, how the cereal you eat in the morning, like how they make it or whatever. They have all kinds of stuff. They need to do one on this guy. This is cool. He built a hydroelectric system which supplied the village power. Otto passed away in 1960. And then in 1963, the Nelson estate was purchased by a guy known as Mudhole Smith, who was a pioneer bush pilot. There we go. We got the bush pilots in on this. He purchased the town site and the buildings. And apparently, let's see, this was the last person on. Sorry, I got some notes messed up here. After Otto died, another guy purchased the land, and Mudhole Smith was the guy that Otto would not have wanted to inherit this. So apparently maybe they had a rift. I don't know. I didn't go deep dive into that. Just kind of interesting. The guy who ended up owning it was not the guy the original owner wanted. This is cool. From the 1930s into the 1960s, Cordova Airlines operated out of Chitina. So there was a thing called a Cordova Airlines out of Chitina, just a little tiny village. I thought that was kind of cool. It does name a lot of in the article I read, a lot of pilots, and they named the pilots as if I'm supposed to know who they are, but I didn't. I didn't recognize any of the names. But apparently there are some relatively famous pilots coming out of there. So that was cool. Today, if you visit Chitina, you may find yourself in historical, kind of like one of those national historic places where you walk in the town and there's like these old historic buildings. So you'll see some of that. There's old restored hotels, or there's an art gallery there called the Spirit Mountain Artworks, which is in an old restored building. So it's kind of an art gallery, which is still going. You might make your way down to the river for a lot of dip netting. So the kind of dip netting / tourism going on there. One article I found says the people who ended up staying in Chitina despite the decline from the mine closures said the reason that they stayed is for the freedom of self-reliance. Isn't that such like an Alaskan thing? They wanted to stay for the freedom of self-reliance. And when they said when they visited any other place, they would just miss it too much. I like that word, the freedom of self-reliance. I feel like that's a very Alaskan cultural value. That was just kind of interesting. I see no churches in Chitina, Alaska. However, I did find a reference to a man named Bert Bingle, who is remembered as the, quote, great church builder of Alaska, who served in Cordova from 1928 to 1935, and sometimes he visited Chitina. There was a family called the Crabs, who were missionaries in Chitina in 1939. Now, I saw these dates. This is kind of interesting. Only the great church builder of Alaska was only there for 7 years. That's interesting. Just, why isn't it very long? And this Crab family, and this record here, just says they were there in 1939, 1 year. The longevity of missionaries is rare in Alaska. So that's interesting. But interestingly, it looks like in 1940, there was a Russian Orthodox priest who lamented the loss of Russian Orthodox influence because of the Protestant missionaries. And he spent his last 8 years in Chitina restoring Russian Orthodoxy. So here's kind of an interesting example of the differences between the Protestants and the Russian Orthodox Church, or just the Orthodox Church. Certainly there are lessons here for myself. I mentioned in the last episode, I need to look at Orthodoxy theology to say, do they teach biblical salvation? They may. I'm actually not sure. So I have some more to learn. And studying this stuff is good for me. Because the Orthodox Church is so prevalent in Alaska, I need to study their theology and wonder, if there's an Orthodox Church, are they teaching biblical salvation? And I'm actually really naive about this as a Alaska podcaster. I should know, but I don't. I just don't. I need to learn about it. So yeah, I'm interested in learning more about Orthodoxy for that reason. All right. So that is Chitina, Alaska. Let's talk about Chuathbaluk. Chuathbaluk. I had to phonetically write this out because it's really hard to pronounce. And if you listen to the show, you probably notice I struggle pronouncing the names of these places, especially when they're the native names, because I don't have that native tongue. I'm just a Swedish American guy and from the Midwest. So I do the best I can. But Chuathbaluk, here we go. Chuathbaluk is located in the north bank of the Kuskokwim River, just upriver from Aniak. Now, I've been to Aniak. I've probably flown near Chuathbaluk, but I have not been there. But I've flown around that area quite a bit. It was originally a site of Ingalik Indian summer fish camp in the mid 1800s and has bore many names over the years, such as Chuka, St. Sergius Mission, Kuskokwim Russian Mission, and Little Russian Mission. It's interesting they didn't land on a name for a while. It just had all kinds of names. And I like that it was a fish camp. So many villages were originally summer fish camps. This is an interesting phenomena in Native Alaskan culture. It still goes on today. There's fish camps where they go in the summer and they dip net and they have their different ways of catching the fish and they process them, smoke them, and that provides food for them throughout the year. I just love this tradition, the fish camp thing. I want to go to one sometime. It just sounds like the best time ever. As a kind of a fisherman myself. I'm not really a dip netter though. I like to have my fishing pole and cast in the water and just kind of be there, kind of a thing. Okay. Anyway, I'm digressing. So this name confusion, all these different names that I had, it was confused often with another village called Russian Mission. I'm pretty familiar with Russian Mission. I've been there a lot. Which is not, it's kind of far away. It's relatively close, but this is Alaska. Everything's far apart. This village was confused with Russian Mission with its similar names. And so when the confusion just became too much, they changed the name to Chuathbaluk, which comes from a Yupik word meaning the hills where the big blueberries grow. Now, I have gone blueberry picking in this area, and there certainly are big blueberries that grow there. So very appropriate name for this village. A Russian Orthodox church was built here in 1894. Another record I found said it was 1891. Other records kind of give a range of dates. But anyway, probably in the late 1800s, a Russian Orthodox church was built by a man named Father Ivan Orlov. I tried really hard to find more information about this guy because these early Russian Orthodox missionaries really interest me. I think it's fascinating. Um, and I couldn't find anything about him, unfortunately. So the church there was called Saint Sergius Mission, and the building of this church attracted more residents to the village. Now, the name Saint Sergius is interesting because it generally refers to multiple people of that name. So this church was named after not just one guy, but several who bear that same name. There's two that are most well known. Excuse me. One is called Sergius of Radonze. Oh man, this is now we're getting to Russian pronunciation. I can try to say it with a Russian accent, but I shouldn't try because it'll just be laughable. Sergius of Radonez. Wow. Okay. Well, this guy was interesting. Sergius of Radonez was known as a reformer and founder of Trinity Larva of Saint Sergius near Moscow. So it's a large Russian Orthodox church in Moscow, Russia. And he's considered one of the most highly venerated saints in Russia in the 14th century, in the 1300s. So the other Saint Sergius was a Roman, this one's even more interesting to me actually. He was a Roman soldier during the 4th century. So long ago, early church history stuff. And he was martyred for his faith because he refused to participate in pagan sacrifices to the Roman gods. So little did Sergius in the 300s AD know that his name would be born on a church in a small village in Alaska. I think that's just cool. All these connections. It's like the world is just getting smaller and smaller. Even now, this guy lived in the 300s and his name is born on a church today in the 2025. That's just interesting. On the other side of the planet, too. All right, in 1954, a man named Sam Phillips resettled the mission, and eventually others joined in, which made the village where and what it is today. Now, Phillips' story is pretty interesting, as he was one of about 50% of the survivors, so of the big sickness, which was the influenza epidemic in 1900, killed about 50% of the people. But Sam Phillips survived. He was born in 1893, and he had to move as a child, around 10 years old, it said, because the Kuskokwim River shifted. And so they had to move their village, and it was called Crow Village. Some sources say he might have been half Russian, which is very possible. In 1954, he moved again, it says, to avoid epidemics. So I don't know if there were, at the time, if there was rumors of other diseases coming about, but it says his motivation was to avoid epidemics. And he moved to the current site of Chuathbaluk. I got to pronounce it right. So he became the recognized leader of the village. Phillips was an accomplished boat builder, woodworker, snowshoe maker. He even helped rebuild the St. Sergius Church that still stands there today. So this church was rebuilt in the 50s, and he helped with that project. He was also fluent in English, which apparently was an asset for his leadership role. Which is true, with this dominating culture coming in and you speak English, it's probably very helpful. Phillips had 3 wives. Each of those wives were named Lucy, and each of his wives died before he did. He had at least 7 children. It says he had 7 with the first wife, so, I don't know. It doesn't say much about if he had kids with his other wives. He may have had one more, I don't know. But he died in 1974 at age 81, and you can see colored photographs of him as an old man. So that's pretty cool. The local school there in the village was named in his honor. It is called Crow Village Sam School. Crow Village Sam School, based on where he came from. So it's kind of interesting to me that all he did was simply move to just out of self-preservation. He wanted to avoid epidemics. And he just did something about it, and he moved to another location, and other people followed him and ended up leaving to his legacy. And it just kind of, the story of Sam Phillips just kind of made me think, if you don't know what to do, just do something. Do something that you're capable of right in front of you. I'm not trying to be preachy. It's just a thought that came to me while I was studying Sam Phillips. You might be surprised. I think it's actually the source of this podcast. I was like, I have some space in my life for something. What can I do? And I said, I'm going to just do this. And it's become kind of a beautiful, lovely thing, I think, is this podcast. So, and which does remind me also, I do also have a brand new YouTube channel. It's called Ends of the Earth Aviation. There are a few videos of me flying in my mall out to some just sandbars and stuff. And I'm going to try to make some more of that. So make sure you check that out. All right. So that is it for today's villages of Chitina and Chuathbaluk. And next week, we have two more villages that are also fun to say. We're going to be doing Chulunawik. That's a fun one to say. Chulunawik. Which in Chulunawik is fun because it is an abandoned village. No one lives there anymore. So we'll have fun telling that story. And we will be doing Circle, Alaska. So when you name a village after a shape, we want to find out why. So we're going to look into that. It is, in fact, a village founded by miners, like many villages in Alaska. So we'll get to those next week. Thank you guys for tuning in this week. And as we get to know our state, one village at a time on Tell Your Story, Alaska. See you later.